Hello, hello! Welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains lost forever. And today, we are going to discuss the Knox and Kane Railroad, which was I was about to say a heritage railway, but that's not strictly true, though they did have a partially tourist element to them. This was a railroad that ran in the state of Pennsylvania, and it had to stop operations due to, no mistakes on their part, really. As the great Captain Picard once said, it is possible to commit no mistakes and still fail. That is not weakness, that is life. And in the case of Knox and Kane, it was very much true for them. While they ran very well for many years, with no issues, it seemed like a combination of both Mother Nature and, bad people outside of their control saw fit to make sure that they would never run again. This is the story of the Knox and Kane Railroad. Now, the Knox and Kane Railroad, sometimes just called K&K, was a short line railroad that operated between Knox in Clarion County to Kane, and then it went on to Mount Jewett in McKean County. Originally, that line actually belonged to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, but in 1982 it was purchased due to B&O discontinuing operations in that area. A lot of K&K's early investments didn't really pan out that well, as the industry that they were supplying was kind of starting to die. Then, a man by the name of Sloan Cornell purchased a portion of the K&K line and began operating it as a tourist railroad over the segment of line from Kane to Marionville. Then a portion of the Erie Railroad was purchased so that tourist trains could cross the Kinzua Bridge. The bridge was the highlight of the tour. See, that bridge was historically relevant, as it was 301 feet, 92 meters tall, and 2,052 feet, 625 meters long. It was billed as the eighth wonder of the world, and was originally constructed out of wrought iron in 1882, and held the record for the tallest railroad bridge in the world for about 2 years. In 1900 it was actually dismantled though, and rebuilt out of steel so it could handle heavier trains, and it remained in commercial service until 1959, when it was finally sold to a salvage company. But in 1963, the government of Pennsylvania themselves actually purchased the bridge as a centerpiece of a state park. The park was opened to the public in 1970. The Knox and Kane tourist line only added to, frankly, just the outdoorsy element of the park. It was a beautiful area, and the bridge was a remarkable piece of construction. Going over it, it was quite a sight. And, I actually kind of have a personal connection to Knox and Kane, as I did go there one time when I was very, very young. My memories of that day are pretty limited, as I can't overstate how young I was, but what I definitely do remember is this: I didn't get to ride the train, because my father and I were late. We didn't live very close to Knox and Kane. It happens, but my dad decided to make the best of it, and we decided to do a chase of the train instead. And I got to see it going over that bridge, and it was definitely something that it was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me. Quite literally, since I never got to see it again. We never went back at any point. The railroad had a bunch of different rolling stock, and there were 2 steam locomotives on their roster. One was number 38, which was a consolidation that was transferred from the Gettysburg Railroad in 1986. It was originally built by Baldwin in 1927 for the Huntington and Broad Top Mountain Railroad. The 38 hadn't actually run since 1988 and was under restoration to be returned to service. Their other steam locomotive was actually Chinese. It was a Tangshan locomotive and rolling stock works built 282, number 58, originally built as SY 1658. in 1989. Yeah, the Chinese were still building steam locomotives that late. Really. I was surprised too, but it was true. So basically, that locomotive was actually brand new as a steam engine, which is weird. But Knox and Kane knew that restoring 38 was going to take a while, so they purchased 58, making her one of only 6 steam engines imported from China after the end of steam in the United States. She remained the main steam locomotive for several years, and I believe is the locomotive I saw going over that bridge. She would almost have to be. They didn't have any others, and 38 wouldn't be ready to run for some time. K&K took themselves very seriously, even constructing a turntable so they could turn their steam locomotives around, as there wasn't one originally. There was also a 4-bay roundhouse built in Marionville. The coaches they used were mostly the old type of Long Island Railroad commuter cars. K&K was unique as they had a collection of new and old equipment. And the ride was allegedly very nice. Again, I never got to ride on it, but I definitely saw it, and it probably would have been beautiful going over that bridge. And despite being fairly successful over the course of the 90s and into the early 2000s, fate had a different idea for the K&K. In 2002, Kinzua Bridge was closed down, as it was determined the structure was at risk to high winds. That isn't unusual. The bridge was a century old, after all, and an Ohio-based bridge construction repair company had been called in to start work on restoring the bridge in February 2003. But on July 21st, 2003, the workers had packed up and were starting to leave for the day when a very bad storm arrived. Now, Pennsylvania is not in the area of the United States that generally gets tornadoes. It's pretty rare for it to happen there. But on that day, one did spawn out of the storm and struck the bridge, snapping and uprooting nearby trees, as well as causing 11 of the 20 bridge towers to fall. No one was killed or injured, fortunately, but the bridge was utterly destroyed. Due to the expense of having to rebuild the entire bridge from scratch, the state decided not to do that. It would have cost them an estimated $45 million, which they just weren't willing to spend at that time. Instead, they proposed that the ruins be used as a visitor attraction to show the forces of nature at work, as the collapse had actually caused the rails to bend, which was pretty extreme. However, no part of this particular pitch and decision by the state took into account the needs of Knox and Kane. The bridge was a major part of their lines. It was one of their major draws. It wasn't like they could draw people in with a historical steam locomotive. They didn't have a 611 or an 844 or anything major. They just had 38 and 58. And yeah, they're nice engines, but 38 still wasn't ready to run, and 58 wasn't historical, technically. She was just over 10 years old, which might as well have been a baby in steam engine years at that point. Their big draw was that bridge and the beautiful scenery around it. Their line was basically cut in half. They couldn't do anything. Their trip was far less desirable, and they saw a 75% decline in the number of passengers, which was crippling for them. They attempted to carry on as best they could, but in the spring of 2006, K&K ceased both their freight and tourist services. Their freight shipments had completely fallen off. No one was really using them. And without the bridge, the tourist line wasn't doing well either. They just had no real way of staying afloat. And the engines and rolling stock were put into storage, while the owners of the line tried to figure out what exactly they were going to do. There was still optimism, though. Some thought that they might be able to figure out a way to afford to rebuild the bridge, or maybe get some new line and start up operations elsewhere. It wasn't like they had no choices. And yet, on Sunday, March 16th, 2008, that all changed. In the early morning on that day, someone, or perhaps a group of people, crept onto K&K's property towards the engine sheds. Whoever these people were decided that it might be funny to set fire to the sheds with the rolling stock still inside. The fire burned the Biddle Street building used to house the trains in Kane, Pennsylvania. This caused $1 million in damage and irreparably destroyed several pieces of historical rolling stock. None of my sources are clear as to whether the culprits who did this were ever identified and arrested, but this single action, perhaps done on a dare or just for straight up kicks, saw to it that K&K would never reopen. Among the victims of the shed fire included a Pennsylvania Railroad caboose number 23016, which had to be scrapped. The Delaware and Hudson passenger car number 241 also had to be scrapped. Worse still, that particular building is where both 38 and 58 were sitting. Both engines suffered significant damage as a result of the heat and flames. 58 suffered damage to her boiler skin, and her cab was lined with wood, which was completely destroyed. 38 had a bit of a better go at it as she had thicker boiler skin, but her boiler jacketing was still badly burned, and her headlight, as well as the reproduction builder's plates, were damaged beyond salvaging. Both locomotives were in a terrible state, and the money needed to fix them would have been outrageous. Due to their lack of historical value, not necessarily being unique, the notion of them being restored to running condition was frankly out of the question. I even went through some old forum posts back when this happened, and most rail fans back during that time were basically saying that it was likely both locomotives would be scrapped. There was just no logical reason to think that they could possibly be saved. On October 10th and 11th, 2008, K&K's rolling stock was finally auctioned off as part of their liquidation sale. They had given up, they just couldn't do it anymore and wanted to make as much money as they could. Not all their rolling stock was damaged during the fire, and many of it went on to other owners, private and heritage alike. In the spring of 2010, the rail crossings along the old line were removed between Clarion and McKean counties. The section between the Bridge State Park and Center Street and Peterson Street is now the Knox Kane Rail Trail. Without that, you might never really know that a rail line had once been there. But what about the steam engines, 58 and 38? Were they scrapped? Well, incredibly, I actually have kind of a happy ending, at least for them. '58 has actually been renamed as Valley Railroad number 3025. She was slightly remodeled during her repair process to masquerade as a New Haven J1 Mikado. She'd been purchased at the liquidation auction by the Valley Railroad and restored to operating condition, despite the terrible damage that had been done to her. By being trapped in a literal inferno, they were able to bring her back up to steam in a restoration that was completed in 2011, which, frankly, is light speed in terms of fixing a steam locomotive, especially one that had dealt with such a large amount of damage. She re-entered revenue service on November 25th, 2011, pulling the North Pole Express. She's become one of the railroad's regular locomotives, and is actually now their largest. 38 is also still around too, purchased by a man named Alan Marples, who's the president of the Everett Railroad. That railroad had also acquired number 38's former stablemate from the Railtown Historic Museum number 11. They're still working on restoring her, however, but it's been a very slow process. As of 2023, they're still plugging away at it as best they can. The frame, tender, and cab are stored outdoors, while the boiler is stored inside the shops out of public view. Once restoration work is completed, number 38 will join number 11 in excursion service on the Everett's trackage. So while these two stepsisters of Knox and Kane probably won't ever ride the rails together again, they're both still around, in homes with people that care about them, which is a heck of a better ending than you would have expected. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders. Some do 267, Orange Glass, Royal Hudson 2860, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Mr. Black Rose, Josh Johnson, Middle for Life, Guy Anzac, A1, Arthur Roy, DM Trouble Typhoon, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Major Klutz, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Dr. Racer 78, Crystal Morgan, Ohio Trucker 1, Lord Hoth 444, Alaric Jaspers, The Baxter, That Guy with a Beard, NG5, and Mark Holding. Till next time, this is Darkness, individual fond farewell.